Most readers expect change to arrive with noise, with movement, with unmistakable signs that something important is about to happen. But in many ancient passages, transformation does not begin with sound. It does not begin with action. And it rarely begins where the reader expects. Instead, it begins in silence. A quiet line, a pause in direction, a moment that appears almost ordinary. So ordinary, in fact, that most people read past it without noticing anything at all. And yet, hidden within that stillness, something has already begun to change. This film explores the quiet moments that appear just before transformation unfolds in biblical writing, moments that seem small, but slowly reshape everything that follows. Ancient texts were not written for speed. They were not designed for scanning eyes or hurried reading. They were spoken slowly, remembered carefully, and heard within communities that understood the value of patience. Biblical symbolic illustration. Stillness was never accidental, and the absence of action could be more significant than action itself. Because silence prepares the listener. It widens attention. It creates space for something new to enter the story. And when that space appears in Scripture, it often signals that the narrative is standing at the edge of change. Across different books, written in different eras, preserved through generations of memory and tradition, similar quiet moments appear again and again. Moments where movement slows, where voices soften, where direction seems uncertain. Nothing dramatic happens on the surface. No visible miracle, no immediate resolution. But the structure of the story begins to turn almost imperceptibly towards something new. Readers who rush forward may never see it. But readers who linger begin to recognize a pattern. Modern reading habits search for clarity, for conclusions, for direct explanation. We are trained to notice what is loud, what is obvious, what demands attention. But ancient writing often works in the opposite way. It hides importance inside quietness. It places meaning inside repetition. It allows structure to speak where words remain simple. Because of this, the most important turning point in a passage may look completely unremarkable at first glance. And only later, sometimes much later, does its significance begin to emerge. Before these texts were widely written, they were heard, spoken aloud in measured rhythm, remembered through repetition, passed from voice to voice across generations. In oral storytelling, pauses guide understanding. They give listeners time to feel the weight of what has been said, and to prepare for what has not yet been spoken. So when a quiet moment appears in Scripture, it may reflect not absence, but intention, not emptiness, but design. Some scholars suggest that meaning in ancient writing is carried as much by structure as by language, where a story slows, where a phrase repeats, where silence interrupts motion. These elements form a pattern that does not force interpretation, but invites reflection. And reflection takes time, which is why these passages continue to speak across centuries. Not loudly, but persistently. Perhaps these quiet transitions endure because they mirror something deeply human. In life, change rarely begins with certainty. It begins with hesitation, with stillness, with moments that feel unclear or unfinished. We often recognize transformation only after it has already begun. And when readers notice the same rhythm inside ancient scripture, the distance between text and life becomes smaller. The power of these writings may not lie in providing answers, but in shaping attention, teaching patience, inviting stillness, allowing meaning to unfold gradually rather than instantly. So the next time a passage feels quiet, the next time nothing seems to happen, you might pause a little longer, because sometimes the most important change in a story has already begun silently. And the only question that remains is this: what quiet moment have you almost missed? Just before everything changed? Because sometimes the most decisive moments in a story do not feel decisive at all. They feel unfinished, uncertain, even fragile. Ancient writers seem to understand this paradox. They did not always mark transformation with spectacle. They allowed it to emerge from stillness. And that stillness often appears in subtle forms: a pause in speech, a shift in direction, a moment of waiting, a sentence that slows the movement of the narrative. At first glance, such moments seem insignificant. Yet when viewed in hindsight, they stand at the edge of everything that follows. In literary studies, structure is not merely the arrangement of events. It is the shaping of experience. A narrative can prepare its reader emotionally long before the event itself occurs. A slowing of rhythm changes expectation, A repetition of imagery deepens anticipation. A silence widens awareness. And within biblical texts, these structural turns often appear just before a decisive shift in direction. Not as explanation, but as preparation. The reader is not told that change is coming. The reader feels it. Anticipation is one of the most powerful forces in storytelling. It stretches time. It heightens perception. It turns ordinary detail into meaningful signal. When a narrative pauses unexpectedly, the mind begins to search. Why did the movement stop? Why does this moment feel different? What is about to happen? Ancient authors understood that the space before change is often more emotionally intense than the change itself. Because in that space, possibility still exists. Everything could shift. Everything could remain the same. The tension lies not in certainty, but in potential. Some scholars suggest that this quietness is intentional design, not hidden meaning, not secret code, but deliberate pacing. When a text slows, it allows the weight of previous events to settle. It gives the reader time to absorb consequence. It opens space for reflection. And reflection transforms how the next event will be understood. Without that pause, change would feel abrupt. With it, change feels inevitable. What makes these passages so easy to overlook is that they appear ordinary. A journey pauses, a character waits. A sentence shifts tone. Nothing dramatic. And yet, the entire trajectory of the narrative quietly adjusts. The ordinary moment becomes a hinge, a pivot point so subtle that it only reveals its importance in retrospect. This is not accidental storytelling, it is restraint. And restraint requires trust. Trust that the reader will return, notice, and recognize the pattern. Modern attention is trained for speed. We scan, we summarize, we search for the conclusion. But ancient texts were composed for immersion. They expected repetition, they welcomed reflection. They assumed patience. Without patience, the quiet hinge disappears. The turning point feels sudden, disconnected, unprepared. But when the silence before it is seen, the transformation feels earned. Perhaps this is why these patterns continue to resonate. Because life itself often follows the same rhythm. Change rarely begins with spectacle. It begins quietly, with doubt, with reconsideration, with a subtle shift in direction. Moments that feel insignificant later reveal themselves as decisive. We often recognize turning points only after we have already crossed them. Ancient scripture captures this rhythm with remarkable sensitivity, not by declaring it, but by embodying it. Waiting is uncomfortable. It creates uncertainty. It removes control. It stretches time. Yet waiting is also where awareness deepens. In biblical narrative, waiting is rarely wasted. It is formative. The pause before action allows intention to gather strength. Without waiting, change feels impulsive. With waiting, it feels purposeful. Across different texts and traditions, the preparation phase appears repeatedly, not with identical wording, not with identical structure, but with identical effect. The narrative breathes. Then something shifts. This pattern does not demand belief. It does not require interpretation. It simply invites observation. And once observed, it becomes difficult to ignore. Perhaps the most significant transformation is not within the text itself, but within the reader. When awareness slows, perception changes. The story feels layered, structured, intentional. Moments once overlooked begin to stand out. And the reader moves from passive consumption to attentive participation. That shift in attention may be the most meaningful turning point of all. Imagine reading a passage slowly, not searching for answers, not rushing toward conclusion, but listening. Allowing silence to remain silence, allowing stillness to remain stillness. Then noticing that the stillness is not empty. It is filled with preparation. It is the quiet alignment of events before they move forward. And when forward motion begins, it feels different. It feels anchored. In a culture defined by noise, the idea that silence prepares transformation is almost counterintuitive. We expect impact to be immediate, change to be visible, meaning to be declared. But ancient narrative suggests otherwise. It suggests that what appears small may be shaping what appears monumental, that what feels still may already be moving beneath the surface. And that awareness of quiet moments can reshape how we understand everything that follows. Perhaps the most important turning points are not the events we remember loudly, but the moments we almost missed. The pause before decision, the stillness before direction changes, The silence before revelation. Ancient writers preserved these moments carefully, not to hide them, but to allow them to breathe. And if we learn to recognize them, not only in scripture but in our own lives, we may discover that transformation is rarely sudden. It is prepared quietly, patiently, in spaces that seem empty until they are seen clearly. So as this reflection comes to a close, consider this. What quiet moment in the story once felt insignificant, only to reveal itself later as the place where everything truly began to change? And what quiet moment in your own life might you be standing in right now, unaware that it is already preparing something new?